So the straight leg deadlift is on your list of potential movements to explore. But it's important with this one in particular that you get the mechanics really well down before you really start to load any sort of weights or resistance into it. And you want to make sure that you can achieve the proper movement. Some of the other movements may be okay to begin with and improve your mechanics as you go. But this particular one especially, it's really essential that you are able to go through the entire range of the motion prior to really executing it. Because if you're unable to do the straight leg deadlift in its proper form, then maybe you want to begin with, say, the bent knee deadlift or anything else that's on the list. Now, one way to tell if you're ready for the stiff leg deadlift, it's quite simple. Can you touch your toes from a standing position? So, with your legs straight, can you hinge at the hips, reach down, and touch your toes? Now, it's a very simple kind of test. If you're able to do that, chances are you have the mobility or range of motion in your body to accomplish the movement. However, if you happen to be one of those individuals that has perhaps always had chronically tight hamstrings, those muscles just cannot lengthen to get you down to that point where you can touch your toes, maybe as hard as you try, you're about here. I would not recommend necessarily doing the stiff leg deadlift or straight leg deadlift until we can achieve a greater range of motion through the hips and open up the hamstrings a bit more. It's just probably asking for a little bit of trouble. And that goes for any exercise, in fact. If you're finding that you don't have the proper range of motion, loading weight or resistance into it, more often than not, is not really going to help improve your range of motion. It's actually just going to create more compensatory patterns. So another way to really work on the form, once you've established that yes, I can touch my toes with my legs straight and I'm ready for the straight leg deadlift, well, you can get yourself a closet dowel or baseball bat, golf club, anything that's a straight line like this. And we're just going to put it on the back side of the body. One hand is going to be on the curve of your lower back or the lumbar curve, while the other hand can hold on at the curve of your neck or cervical spine. What you'll be doing is trying to maintain points of contact of your body against this dowel. So the back of the head, the mid-back, as well as the tailbone itself should maintain contact. So as you perform the deadlift, we want to make sure that all 3 points of contact stay against the dowel. If you find that you begin to pull the head away, well, we know that you've broken form already. And that goes true for the other 2 points. We often find that if you're really good with, say, yoga and extending through the spine, that the mid-back is probably going to be a point that pulls away from the dowel first. If you have a tendency to be on your cell phone a lot, then chances are that head is not accustomed to being back in alignment, so you might find the head pulling away. And if you have a seated posture often throughout the day, it may be that the hips themselves have a hard time keeping alignment with the upper structure itself. It's a good tool to use perhaps before starting to load weights into the action itself. So then we can, once past that, we can start to load the body with the stiff leg deadlift. Now I've got a kettlebell that we can use, and you may want to start with just the lightest weight and then gradually, progressively start to load up the body more and more. There's no need to just jump right into 100, 200, 500 pound deadlift. Just start with the mechanics, get the body accustomed to it, and then gradually over time, progressively start to load more and more. In this case, I've got a 44-pound kettlebell. Now, I'm going to have my feet on either side of the kettlebell, and I'm going to keep my legs stiff, not locked out at the knees, but ever so softly bent. And the way this movement originates is by taking my hips and driving them back as much as I can. And the more I push them back, the more it forces my torso to lean over and get down to that kettlebell. The kettlebell itself will be more or less right between my feet. And in this position, I'm going to keep my head mostly neutral and engage the muscles on the back of the hips to drive me up to a standing posture. Now, it's not essential that I go into extension beyond a straight line. I just want to get up to a tall posture. And then I initiate the hips pulling back to lower the weight down. Now, what we'll often see is with the stiff-legged deadlift is that the knees begin bending when they shouldn't. For instance, as the hips go back, you might begin to see a person's hips go back, but they're going down at the same time, creating more flexion in the knees and turning this almost into a squat or bent knee deadlift. So instead of feeling the hips drop down, they just want to draw straight back and stay the same distance off the floor as when they first began. And then they just come back right on up. From a frontal view, kettlebell is anchored right on the floor between both feet, pushing the hips back. The head is just going to stay in a fairly still position with the rest of the torso. It's not going to necessarily have to crane up or lower down, but it just stays the same distance. It's the hinging of the hips that creates this motion, and then I drive on up and then lower back down again. Now we can also use the hex bar or barbell. In this case, the hex bar is this six-sided bar that goes around my body, and I can load the weights on either side. And then in this position, the same motion should occur. Hips go back behind me, and then I drive on up again. The beauty of the hex bar is that I'm able to load the weights on either side, but they stay more or less balanced around my body, so they're not trying to pull me forward like a barbell might. Whatever tool you use, it's your prerogative, and you may find that one's a little bit more manageable or maybe more challenging than another, depending upon what you're looking for. The key here, though, is the hinging of the hips, keeping the legs softly bent but not flexing and extending through the movement, and that the spine stays at the same angle. We're just simply rotating through that axis of the hip socket itself. So be sure you assess before and after, and be sure that you pre-test yourself to make sure that you have the right range of motion before going into the deadlift itself.